Hi. Today we're going to look at how we can reduce the risk and increase the compliance of our digital operations by harmonizing our enterprise processes, embedding risk activities in the employee's day-to-day, and automating a continuous monitoring program. Let's take a look at Andrew's experience. Andrew is our risk manager, and this is his oversight mechanism for risk across the enterprise. Andrew was able to set up multiple methodologies to evaluate risk and change the reporting right here to reflect each. So as he clicks away from enterprise risk onto operational risk, all the data will change, including the domains of data he's been studying as part of his operational risk methodology. Now, when Andrew needs to conduct a risk review with someone, he uses the heat map to do it. So we can blow the heat map out. And now we're looking at risks in a heat map format. We can change the methodology up here if we choose to. We can filter by individual risks and entities so that he can dial the data into the audience that he's speaking to. He can also switch the view between inherent and residual from here. And he can search for particular risks. So if we were interested in vulnerability related risks, we could find that here. And we can actually see how that particular risk is trending over time. Now, if we go back out and get to the full list of risks, if we need to dig into a risk further, we can do that from here. So let's take a look at the non-compliance of laws and regulations. If we click into the risk, we can see all the details related to this risk. Things like the effectiveness of our mitigating controls, the overall residual risk, where the risk sits in the risk framework. We can get insight into the individual controls through this tab and see which ones specifically are non-compliant and compliant. And we can get a sense of any risk assessments that have been performed. In this case, Andrew's interested to see the last risk assessment for this particular risk. When he clicks in, he can see the actual assessment results and understand that the assessor is choosing to mitigate this risk. If Andrew wants to see the details of the assessment, so how the assessor answered everything, he can click on the View Assessment button right here. Once the form opens up, Andrew can see the inherent, the control assessment, and the residual assessments here. If he wants to see particular details and how the questions were answered, that of course that's available to him. And he can also see reference information particular to this assessment around issues related to this particular risk at its inherent state. As he clicks through, the issues will change. So these are the issues related to these particular controls and so forth down the line. And then when we get down to the risk response, this was the chosen response from the assessor. Now, these assessments are made available through things like an employee portal or through a workspace as we're viewing them here. Because as the assessments are easier to find and engage with, employees are more likely to fill them out. And as employee engagement goes up, our risk comes down and our compliance goes up. To give you a sense of what it looks like from the assessor's point of view, I'm going to open up one that I've already started. And this is how it looks. I'm answering the questions and I'm moving down to the next section. Now let's go back to our oversight mechanism and take a look at some of the entities that are at highest risk. If we choose our operational risk management methodology, we come in here and let's look at consumer banking. So this overview shows our compliance and our most non-compliant downstream relationships. It's showing us our status as, the residual risk being high, downstream risk ratings. It's also showing us issues, policy exceptions, and controls related not just to consumer banking, but everything that supports consumer banking. If Andrew wanted to get a better view of issues overall across the enterprise, he does have an issues overview available to him. This is all issues, and then he can start to filter by the entities that he's interested in. So maybe that's a department or an application or a business service. If we go back to where we were, we might want to take a look at all of the downstream risks related to consumer banking. In this case, these are the ones directly related to consumer banking, but Andrew can also see all of the risks that are downstream from consumer banking. If Andrew wants to get an idea of where consumer banking sits in his overall program, if we come to the 360-degree view, this is showing you consumer banking in the middle, but also all of the elements of the program that apply to consumer banking. If I click on these, there's live data that it'll bring me to. But let's keep going through the consumer banking form. Here in the highlighted details, this is showing us that downstream hierarchy. So this is showing us the things that consumer banking relies on. This is also showing us all of the regulatory bodies that consumer banking is subject to, and any policies internal to the company that consumer banking needs to comply with. Today, Andrew needs to investigate some issues he's having with vulnerability management, so he's going to click into digital banking. In digital banking, he can expose the vendors, the people, the processes, and the technology that make up digital banking. We can even get all the way down to our fourth party, so the vendors for our vendors. The entire time, our risk and compliance scores are being rolled up the hierarchy to digital banking and then on back to consumer banking and up the chain to the company level. This technology inventory is coming from several sources, including asset management, change management, vulnerability scans, and others. All these processes combine for a virtuous cycle that maintains a centralized asset inventory for the good of the group. For instance, we see that this business services is critical. We know this because we've performed a business impact analysis and it told us so. As part of that business impact analysis, we identified some relationships that were absent from the CMDB and were able to add them. And don't forget, we're still demonstrating all the regulatory bodies that digital banking needs to comply with. To continue his investigation into vulnerabilities, Andrew's going to click on some technology. His first stop is the server owned by Billy. Billy has a control that says he's supposed to be addressing vulnerabilities within 15 days if they're critical or high. However, it's showing as non-compliant. Of course, Andrew wants to understand why, so clicking into the actual control, he sees that there's some indicator failures. Now, an indicator is an automated data collection mechanism that is part of the continuous monitoring program that Andrew stood up when he implemented ServiceNow. By giving ServiceNow access to the vulnerability data and defining the problem condition, ServiceNow was able to automatically recognize the problem condition and create an issue assigned to Billy to remediate that problem. So Andrew can have faith that Billy's already working on this. That's a vastly different starting point for your risk and compliance staff. Instead of having to determine if there was an issue, Andrew is able to inquire on the issues that have already been identified. That means he gets to spend time fixing problems instead of identifying them. Now, he's feeling pretty good about this control. However, he sees that there's a risk event associated to it. So clicking on that, it looks like there's been some exfiltration of data, and that might be impacting our brand. When we go to the risk event, we can see we're still trying to iron out the details, but we've added the brand image risk to that risk event so that we can put a remediation plan in place for those impacts. Now Andrew wants to see how someone else is doing with their vulnerabilities. By choosing a different child in digital banking, he can go to the overview and see that there's a policy exception sitting out here for Damon because Damon's unable to run the scanning tools. Maybe Damon's on a segment of the network it can't get to, or maybe there's a software conflict. Regardless, we're showing as compliant, but that it's exempted only for a given period of time. ServiceNow is going to monitor that time frame and notify everyone before it expires. Now, Andrew was able to achieve all these goals by using the Technology Controls Monitoring Accelerator offered on the ServiceNow store. This is an accelerator that contains most of the content you've seen here that gives customers a jump start on their risk and compliance journey. Now, all this vulnerability and risk data isn't just for Andrew. There are other people out there that we want to present risk and vulnerability data to. For instance, your CISO. So another view of this data, it's all the same data because it's all on the same platform, But another view of this data might look like this, where you've got a systems hardening tab on a CISO dashboard, giving you insight into your vulnerability management program overall, but along with that, the business risk and policy control perspectives targeted to the CISO. So rather than the CISO have to understand how to navigate Andrew's experience, the CISO has their own experience germane unto them. And this is how ServiceNow can help you reduce risk and increase compliance in your digital operations.